Good evening and welcome to tonight's event, Read Brave, Talk Brave. I am Catherine Penkert, Director of St. Paul Public Library. This evening's program was filmed on April 10th, the day before Daunte Wright was fatally shot by police in Brooklyn Center. I filmed this introduction on Tuesday, April 20th. We acknowledge the pain and exhaustion that continues to ripple through our community as we reckon with racism and systemic white supremacy. Before I introduce tonight's conversation, I would like to acknowledge the land upon which St. Paul Public Libraries are located. Every community owes its existence and vitality to generations from around the world who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy to making the history that led to this moment. Some were brought here against their will, some were drawn to leave their distant homes in hope of a better life, and some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We are standing on the lands of the Dakota people. We acknowledge the Ojibwe and Ho-Chunk people who also call this place home. We pay respects to their elders past and present. Take a moment to consider the treaties made by the tribal nations that entitle non-Native people to live and work on traditional Native lands. Consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. Please join us in using this community space as a place for growth and reconciliation. We invite you to use this moment together to examine our cultural narratives that perpetuate violence against Indigenous communities and work to create space to engage with and learn from Indigenous community members. Tonight's event is part of Read Brave, St. Paul's annual citywide reading program. Through Read Brave, we invite community members of all ages to come together around books and to come together in deeper conversation around an issue critical to our city. This year's Read Brave theme is Owning Our Stories, Rising Together for a Better St. Paul. We center this year's reading, programs, and conversations on themes of self-worth, racial healing, reconciliation, liberation, and accountability. In order to continue to rise together for a better St. Paul, we need to talk bravely and listen openly to our neighbors. I am thrilled to introduce our guests for this evening's Read Brave, Talk Brave conversation. Author Junauda Petrus-Nasah, Mayor Melvin Carter, and two leaders from local organization Irreducible Grace Foundation, Moises, Meza, and Latrese Johnson. Thank you also to our partners and sponsors who make Read Brave possible, the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library, Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, and the St. Paul Saints. Thank you and enjoy the evening.
Greetings. Hey, thank you so much, Catherine, for that wonderful introduction. I am so excited for this conversation. I'm so excited to continue reading Brave together as a community, and so thrilled today to be joined by this group of folks who I have the pleasure of chatting with here today. You know, it's 2021, so we've got sounds of dogs and babies and doorbells in the background, but we're just going to keep this conversation moving. So Read Brave is our goal, our initiative citywide to say, how do we center real, meaningful conversations that we need to have in our community? How do we think together about about trends, about themes that are critical to us, critical to our neighbors, critical to our community, and critical to our future together? The idea is while some cities have like one book club or a mayor's book club or something like that, the idea is to center this not just around a book, but to center this around an idea or a concept that we can all chat about. Our librarians do a wonderful job curating a set of books that center around a young adult novel, but also include picture books and children's books, and even a nonfiction book, so that we can center a big conversation, a citywide conversation that we can have in every preschool and every grad school across our city. This year's topic is Owning Our Stories, Rising Together for a Better St. Paul. We know that we've been through a lot over the course of the last year, and we know that we have an enormous amount of trauma underfoot right now and in the immediate future for us as we recover in a post-pandemic world, in a post-murder of George Floyd world, that we have a lot to process together. And one of the things that's going to be critical is for us all to own, but then also to be prepared to share our stories so that we can build community together. We have such an incredible group of folks here to have that conversation today. The focus is on self-worth. It's on racial healing. It's on reconciliation. It's on liberation. It's on accountability. And so I'm excited to be here today with the author of a pretty incredible book that you all know about, Stars and the Blackness Between Them. We have Junauda Petrus, who's with us, but then we're also joined by Latrese and Moises, who are with us as well. So I'd like to kick it to you all to introduce yourself with the question. We just talked about owning our stories, rising together for a better St. Paul. We're talking about self-worth, racial healing, reconciliation, all those good things I just talked about. How do you and your story, all of your story, relate to this year's topic? But I'm going to kick it first. Before we jump in there, I think I'm supposed to kick it to you, Moises and Latrese, to kick us off with a centering and mindfulness exercise. So you guys are here from the Irreducible Grace Foundation. So I'd love to hear you just give us a rundown of what Irreducible Grace is and help us center ourselves for this conversation.
Mm-hmm. Latrese and I, as you said, are from IGF. IGF focuses on creating safe spaces with youth of color, and in our meetings, we teach mind-body medicine tools and breathing techniques to help center ourselves and be able to process trauma and stress. And we try our best to connect them to as many resources as we possibly can to help give them a voice and give them the necessities that they deserve, well, that they need.
Yeah, thanks, Moises. So just to add, like, we are facilitators, and we are also so much more. Like, we actually came on as a partner with the St. Paul Public Library, just like as two young people of color, and we chose the Read Brave book, and we also created a podcast that discusses it. So if you're, looking to hear about that, you can check it out on the St. Paul Public Library website. So like Moises said, in a lot of the workshops that we facilitate, we like to do a ritual, an opening ritual of a breath, because, when you join a meeting, sometimes you might have like anxiety. I know right now I'm super nervous, or, you just need to breathe before you just like enter the space. So we wanted to lead you all through a tool. It's called the 4 for 4. A lot of people know it as box breath. I'm sure that you all have done it before, but we kind of want to teach it in like a different way, in our own IGF special way, so that you might be able to go ahead and use it in the world. So breathing actually activates the vagus nerve, which is inside of our bodies, and it runs from our brain, and it's especially concentrated in our bellies. So when we take deep breaths and stimulate our vagus nerve, it can help us slow down our nervous system's response, which is sometimes fight or flight, So when we breathe, it helps us slow it down. So something, I guess, interesting I want to share about me is that my mom is deaf, and American Sign Language was my first language. So I talk with my hands a lot, and I want to teach you all the Asl signs for inhale, hold, and exhale, because that's what we'll be doing. And I know when people breathe mindfully, especially me, I like to also mindfully move. So we're going to place our hands on our chest to learn the sign for inhale. And we'll just bring our hands out because our lungs expand when we inhale. Then when we hold, we'll put our hands like this, like we're holding candy, or like just anything in our hands. And then when we exhale, we'll bring them back out and toward our chest. This is exhale. And then hold to our chest. All right, so now that we know the signs, I want to explain the tools. So we'll be inhaling for 4 counts, holding our breath for 4 counts, exhaling for 4 counts, and holding that for 4 counts. And then we're going to do it 4 times, because then we come full circle with the name. All right, so let's just go ahead and get right into it. Place your hands on your chest and notice your heartbeat. Just practicing some mindfulness. I always like to express gratitude for my heart and how hard it works for me to keep me alive and present in this moment. Go ahead and inhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4.
Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4.
All right. So just take a minute to notice how your body's feeling. I feel a lot better than when I first started talking. Thank you so much for breathing with us, and we'll just pass it back to Mayor Carter. Thank you.
Thank you for that centering exercise. That's a great thing to do to help us find our center. And thank you also, Latrese, for sharing a little bit about yourself. I'd love to ask you to keep on going. So maybe I'll go right back to you, Latrese, and back to you, Moises, to just ask you to introduce yourself, the question that I teed up before we did that centering exercise, which is we're talking about owning our stories. And rising together, we're talking about racial healing, reconciliation, accountability, liberation. How does your personal story, Latrese, respond? How do you relate to this topic?
I feel like I relate to all of them, just because like I am 17 right now, and I'm experiencing, obviously figuring out who I am and the things that I value. And one of those things is social justice. Very, very passionate about racial justice, especially. So I feel like all of those things, like liberation, like Black liberation, that's always something that I'm like working toward. And I always ask myself, like, in just about everything that I do in regards to activism, like, is this going to help my people be liberated? And if the answer is no, then I'm not going to do it. So, and then when it comes to self-worth, just like realizing how important I am and encouraging myself to radically practice self-care, I think is a big part of, just like what I'm learning. And over the past, 5 years, I've only been doing this, but yeah, so that's how it relates to me.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And how about you, Moises?
For me, I suppose it'd be my coming into adulthood, having to find out what I want to do, who I want to be, and getting the steps ready to do that. You have to start becoming more accountable for yourself, more responsible. You have to work on ways to become independent and liberate yourself from what you've been raised. And sometimes you have to create your own values despite what you've been taught or told for certain things. And you have to heal from maybe things that you've experienced in your childhood growing up, from in the house or outside the house. So it's a lot trying to go from one stage to the next. And I relate to a lot of these topics because you have to do a lot of self-reflection if you want to be your own person.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, and that's one of the things that I find interesting about this book is just all the different themes that it touches, right? And to be honest, one of my first kind of reactions to it, as we talk about, centering Read Brave in a discussion, a conversation, is almost that this book is almost too complex, right? Because it's like, which thing are we talking about? But in reality, we're living all of them at the same time. And so to just try to pretend we can only talk about one at a time is somewhat artificial. Junauda, thank you so much for joining us here today. I want to ask you the question a little bit differently because you're the creative mind that kind of launched this story into the world. I'm suddenly surrounded by you and I have just met, but I'm suddenly surrounded by all kinds of fans of yours. Our librarians are your fans. My family is your fans. We have all kinds of fans in our community. Moises and Latrese are your fans. You've got all kinds of just ridiculously amazing accolades for this book, including the Coretta Scott King Award, which has to be amazing. So I guess my question for you is like, is this autobiographical? Like, how do you imagine this? I would imagine your story has to relate to this because I don't think you could write this in this way without that. So I'm just curious, like, how you see yourself in this story, how you see yourself in the characters, and sort of an open-ended question, like, what did you sit down to write?
Yeah, thank you for those questions. And oh my gosh, Latrese and Moises, thank y'all for y'all's wisdom. Even though y'all feel like y'all are just so wise, and it really just like
That's right.
touches my heart, you know, to get to connect with young people as much as I do now that I'm a young adult author. But yeah, for me, the book really kind of came from a place of I've been doing a lot of like, I'm an activist as well, and have been an artist, you know, for a little bit more than the last decade. But a lot of my background comes from youth work, doing gardening. My mom is from Trinidad. My dad's from St. Croix. I was born and raised in Minneapolis. So there's a lot of the geographies in the book that are my personal geographies. As well as just like, you know, what are all these stories that lived inside of me that I wished I could have seen in books, as well as what are the stories that like I'm living with, you know, that like surround me and are like constellations in the people around me that, you know, we don't get to hear and listen to. So I think the book first arrived to me as just kind of this idea of this kid with an uncertain kind of, you know, future and diagnosis comes across, you know, the life story of a man on death row who's been on death row since he's been that child's age, and kind of this mutual sort of like star-crossed experience. And me as a young Black person, actually, when I was Latrese and Moises' age, and actually I saw Latrese, you have Assata Shakur's, you know, the cover of her autobiography on your wall, and like it was a lot of memoirs, you know, a lot of freedom fighters and revolutionaries like Assata Shakur, Malcolm X, Audre Lorde, just like people, but specifically also people who were incarcerated, Mumia Abu-Jamal. Like those were the people who kind of taught me about how resistance in America, if you're Black, if you're Latinx, Asian, Native, you know, even, you know, white folks, if you're resisting, you know, sort of these power norms, you know, it will be a thing that you will be sought after and maybe, you know, preyed upon. So I think for me, that was really eye-opening to also understand that these people were young, that like, to me, Assata Shakur was like, oh my God, you're this revolutionary, but that she felt young and unsure. So I think for me, this book was a way of kind of like, what are the stories that I would want young people to listen to and hear? What ways can they be empowered both in their politics and their spirituality and their romance and sensuality too? Because, you know, that's such an important part of life. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, it's, you know, it's a beautiful story, but also the dialogue is interesting. Your writing style has been described as like lyrical. And so I'm curious who your like influences as authors were. There were some of those pages where I felt like I was reading like Zora Neale Hurston. So I feel like, you know, like some of those Harlem Renaissance era type of authors seem to be speaking to me through your writing. But who are your influences? Like who are your role models as authors?
Yeah, I think for me, it's interesting because I wanted to, yeah, so certainly authors, but I also think hip hop, you know, like I was really raised at a time when like, not only was there so many different kinds of hip hop, there was just so much storytelling in hip hop, and so much lyricism and so much like archiving of history. And actually I wanted to name DMX today, actually, because I think like DMX really was a person that gave so much emotion and just like raw sort of power to their like experiences as a Black person. So certainly like, I think, you know, Lauryn Hill, I think Fugees, obviously, if I'm saying that, Tribe Called Quest, De La Soul. I just loved how different MCs have a different way of, even like, you know, Busta Rhymes, when he comes onto a track, there's a certain, you know, adrenaline, you know? So I think for me, like, listening to a ton of music, and for me, like, you know, you named Zora Neale Hurston, you know, of course, as far as like, how do you sort of honor the way that Black people speak and not see it as like, oh, well, we're not proper, or that's not how you speak English. But English is all language is living, and Black people empower and enliven language wherever we are, but certainly in the United States. So, Zora Neale Hurston for me is that, Alice Walker, obviously, Toni Morrison, and Tozake Shange, who is truly lyrical, very poetic. So yeah, I think for me, and certainly like even some nonfiction folks, like, I mentioned before, like how are we getting to just hear people tell stories from their heart, because that to me is always like and actually the Autobiography of Malcolm X, which I don't think I've mentioned, but that to me was a book where you're like, wow, here's this person who is so powerful and so vulnerable and just speaks to being young and feeling very like you don't know life. So yeah, so for me, like in writing, like those are some of my, like, I'm sure there's so much more that I can think of actually, because I love to read. So
no, I appreciate that. And it's funny how many of those books I overlap, in my experience with you. I think about, you just closed on the Autobiography of Malcolm X. And you took me back to 15, 16 years old reading that book and being like enormously inspired by it. And I actually think the way that you carve those narratives, the way that you carve that dialogue, some writers write to let you know that they have the thickest thesaurus. And some writers write in the ways that people speak and are used to hearing and experiencing the English language. And I think that that's a part of why people relate to this book so much. Moises and Latrese, you guys have been a part of Read Brave 2021 since the beginning of this kind of cycle, since the beginning of this process. You guys were really, really influential in picking this year's theme. And like I said, even as we were going, is this too complex a story? The feedback that I got back through you guys was really, really influential. And so I guess my question is, like, of all the books you were looking at, like, what made this title stand out to you, and what made you feel like it would resonate with the people of our community here in St. Paul?
For me, the title stood out just because I had known about it like 2 years before it was even published. So I met Junauda in Minneapolis, like at a random rec center. I don't remember the name just because I'm not from Minneapolis. And we were celebrating Juneteenth. And she was like, yeah, I have this book and like I'm just going to read some poems from it. And she read me the poem for Pisces, because I'm a Pisces. And I was like, this is nice. So I bought the book when it first came out. I didn't even read it, but I gifted it to one of my friends. But I didn't like actually read it until like the Read Brave thing came around, and I was like, okay, let me actually read it. And I loved it so much. Like, it really resonated with me just because like I'm also queer and Black. So, and I was just like going through like a lot at the time, like with my sexuality, just like not knowing and being uncomfortable with like the fact that I like girls. So it was really nice to like be able to just read it and like not have to speak it out loud, because I feel like sometimes like having to talk about, a part of your identity that you're not super confident about was like really hard for me. So to be able to just sit by myself for a couple hours and like interact with the book was like really helpful for me, and helped me gain a lot of confidence afterwards. So we had to read the other titles of the Read or potential Read Brave books as well, and I was just like, nah, this is the one. Like, it just stands out to me the most. Like, so yeah.
I appreciate the way you guys are sharing your stories. And my guess is our author does too, judging by the look on her face. Moises, how about you?
For me, it'd be a lot like what you said. Because of its complexity, it's able to reach such a broad audience, and it's able to connect to so many people and so many different themes, that because of what Read Brave was designed to do, which was to reach out to as many young people as it possibly could, it just felt like the only choice to have. And, being able to connect with all the characters in it, despite like not checking all the boxes that the characters are, I was able to relate to them a lot when, like, parents being a little hard on certain topics in life, and being taught certain things but wanting to follow another, and trying to escape chains and be your own individual in your own household. It's a phenomenal book. I really like it.
I hear you both talking about escaping chains. I heard that's what you just said. Latrese, I heard you say something I think was really powerful, and that's how do we deal with the parts of our own personality or the parts of our identity that we're not super confident in, I think is what you said. And that's, I think, maybe the important kind of thing of it, because whether you're queer or whether you think you're overweight or whether you think you're underweight or whatever it is, we all have these things in us, right, that we're like not sure about, not sure how people would react to. And our instinct is to kind of hide those things and hold those things. And so I guess the question to you is, what do you think are some of the things that get in our way of sharing our stories, right? Of owning and sharing our stories. And what do you see as the keys to us getting beyond those points? This is a question for you, Moises. Why don't you start, Moises? And I'm going to ask you the same question, Latrese.
Sure thing. This can be a lot of different things. A lot of them is just like conflicting opinions, and it being a person that you care about, and you don't want to create beef between someone you've known for a long time and someone that you've cared about for a long time, just because you want to express your views around them, which is unfortunate. Being able to have open dialogue with whoever you want, and especially someone that you're close with, is super important. But for me personally, it's when I tell them something that I want them to hear, it's mostly because I just want them to listen, to them know a little bit more about myself, know a little bit more about that day or why I was feeling a certain way. And they take the initiative to try to fix whatever I was trying to share with them. So they'll start giving me tips on how to, like, maybe you can wake up earlier and you won't feel so crappy during the day. Maybe if you like start exercising a bit more, or maybe if you like fix your diet. And like, I know these things. This isn't new information for me. I know there are certain ways I can improve my quality of life, but I just wanted you to listen to me. That one is one of the biggest contributors to me hiding a lot of myself.
Wow. Latrese? Thank you, Moises. I honor that. I don't have anything to say beyond that because that was so powerful what you just said. But thank you for sharing yourself in this space.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Moises was saying. I also just feel like society has kind of conditioned us to, or not but like has decided, what is acceptable and what is not when it comes to, sharing parts of your story. And I feel like the way that we can work through that is like decolonizing our minds and realizing like, okay, well, why do I not like this part of myself? It's probably because of like colonialism and just like European beliefs that were, instilled into our ancestors to make us, not proud of who we are. So, I mean, one thing that helped me personally is just like keeping in mind like my ancestors, and like the book also talks about this too, just knowing that they were queer and proud. So like I should be too.
Love it. Love it. Junauda. Oh, go ahead, Moises. You had something to add?
Yeah, just there's another part of it, not wanting to weigh someone else down, because a lot of people in my family, they're already struggling through a lot of things themselves. And when I'm struggling with something and I want to have a conversation with them about it, I always think like, man, they already have a lot on their plate and I'm just going to throw more on it. I'm going to tip their scales. And maybe what if I'm the thing that ends up stressing them out even more rather than being a reason to help them? And that's just a little voice in the back of my head, despite me knowing that the best form of action would be to communicate with them and to have an emotional conversation, because that's the way both people are able to relieve themselves of weight and being able to relate with one another and connect deeper to people that they love.
Can
Now
I?
I'll pass it to you.
Right.
Go ahead, Nuru.
Is it okay if I add on to that just real quick? Like that's definitely something.
Absolutely.
Okay, so like I've been talking about that in therapy. Like that is so true. Like sometimes people are like, "Oh, I don't want to talk about this because, I don't want to stress other people out." But like I feel like that's where like breathing is really helpful, and just like, in IGF, like we shake things off because sometimes we like carry and we hold so much trauma from other people, and in addition to ourselves, like being able to learn how to best metabolize it, I feel like is a really, really like good skill. especially if you're trying to be like a good friend or a good family member. It definitely takes practice, though, I will say that.
Yeah. Look, like you guys are dropping dimes, you guys are dropping jewels. This is so beautiful to be a part of this conversation. Sweetness is here. Kissing at all things, broken or confused, you are safe, universal, limitless, sacred, sensual, divine, free. That's from our book. That's this beautiful mantra that Audrey whispered for Mabel's healing. It's relevant today as we walk through the trauma of the Derek Chauvin trial, as we relive the trauma of the murder of George Floyd, as we are all not only have these things that you guys are just talking about, but we're kind of by ourselves in them, as you know, we've been in distance learning and we've been remote working from home and having this conversation on the screen instead of where in any other circumstance we'd have this conversation in person. And we have all of this loss and grief and pain and trauma to process together. Open mic for anybody. What affirmation would you offer our community, your friends, your family members, yourself, for our collective healing right now?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say something. I just really am so, like Latrese and Moises, like, oh my God, I'm fangirling over y'all. And just really like amazed at the ways that, y'all have access to a certain kind of honesty with yourselves and vulnerability that I think really is strength. Like I think we are seeing so much in our society that these facades of strength and power and overpowering really does come from like deeply like violent and patriarchal roots. And like, yeah, like how do we give ourselves permission to like, allow joy and bliss and beauty to like shape our lives, even in the midst of all of the trauma and ugly, which I think is actually the beautiful part, I think, of so much of like our oppressed lineages. Like as much as there's like, oh, struggle on the road of struggle, like this sort of like heaviness that we acknowledge, there's just still so much like wildness and beauty and sweetness and sensuality. And to constantly affirm that with ourselves, especially in times where we're taught that like just being who we are could result in our death. So I just loved hearing you read that affirmation, actually, Mayor Carter, because I do think it's like it takes leaders, to be like, as a leader, I'm leading in my ability to see what I need, the ability to hold the ways that needs, will always sort of be obstacles to people's joy if we don't acknowledge them. And, yeah, so I feel like, that affirmation is great, but I'm like so excited and curious to hear what Moises and Latrese might have to say, or even Mayor Carter, there might be ways that an affirmation that you use as a leader of a major city in a time like this, that it's not just, obviously Black men, but like all kinds of people are being othered into violence and into murder, so yeah. Folks, what y'all thinking?
Moises, Latrese, I hear the question and I'll respond. I'd love to hear Moises and Latrese's response first.
Okay, I have one. So for myself, like I always remind myself, remember who you are. And I mean, like I could talk about my ancestors all day, because I love them so much. But like they are me and I am them. So I feel like the best way for me to honor them is to just like be the best person that I can be, and remembering the resiliency that they had, yes, but then like also allowing myself to be vulnerable, which is like essential. I feel like when it just comes to being balanced, and then just in addition to that, like also just remembering all of the obstacles that I've overcame. And so when I hit like another challenge and I'm like, remember who you are. And it's like, yeah, I made it through all those other obstacles. Like there's no reason why I can't do this one. And then I would also offer that to literally everybody else, and just take it and make it what you need it to be. You can always, it doesn't have to be the same meaning as it is to me, but remembering who you are.
All right. Something that happens to me a lot because I have ADHD is I end up thinking too far ahead. So I'll go like, all right, I'm gonna try to apply for this, and I'm gonna get this opportunity, and I'm gonna connect with these people, and I'm gonna get this amount of like resources, and I can use those resources for this thing, and I can maybe grow this part of my life, and at the end of that little plan that I've decided to do in the middle of my breakfast and that Sunday morning, I end up getting this existential crisis at the end of it, where I'm like, oh, this is so much, I can't take it. And I kind of start crumbling down at the beginning of my day just because I decided to go on this little uh, mental adventure of what my life could be. So I'd say a good mantra to have is to just look at what's happening right now, or look at what's happening tomorrow. To stop thinking so far of what'll happen 10 years from now, 20 years from now, because that's not something we would ever know under any circumstance. So just focus on what's in front of you before you try to look at what's the mountain behind the mountain that you're looking at.
Yeah, and I think that's it exactly. I mean, this moment feels so enormous, and this moment feels like a moment that there's just so much going on. And it would be impossible, I'll tell you right now, just between the four of us and everybody watching. Um, some of the stuff we've been through as a community is just stuff that no person, as mayor, as governor, as anything else, she's my daughter's participating in the conversation, that no person could just know how to guide a community through, And one of the things that really helps me, one of my mentors, so you guys may know of, his name is Mahmoud Al-Khatti, and he's a longtime professor here in St. Paul. And he's been sort of a guide for me in some of the ways that our main characters had guides in this story. And he told me when I first got elected to the city council, he said, look, just remember, every single mom you meet, every senior citizen you meet, every high school student you meet is in their own right a subject matter expert on American life. And if you stay rooted in community, if you stay rooted in them, no matter what office you hold, stay rooted, and you'll be able to meet kind of whatever challenge kind of comes up. So that's a piece for me, is this notion that none of us is as smart as all of us, and that we can meet some incredible challenges working together that might feel impossible working separately. What I think we need, though, Junauda, is a Black Eden, right? Like, and I kid you not, like, if there wasn't all the Coretta Scott King Awards and there wasn't all the critical reviews, the notion that this book includes a place called Black Eden would have been in and of itself compelling enough for me to just want to pick it up and find out what that's about. So, Junauda, what is Black Eden? Where did the idea come from for you? And what are your what's your Black Eden?
Yeah, I think for me, I grew up gardening with my mom. As I shared, both my parents are from the Caribbean, and, my mom, even though she's a city girl in the islands, like, she grew up with her grandfather, who very much was, knew how to, heal with bush and herbs and all kinds of things. So even like growing up in South Minneapolis in the hood, we gardened, and, I learned so much about just myself in that process. And it became work that I did as I grew older, teaching gardening, both in, Minneapolis and in Harlem and New York City, to young people. And I think particularly in urban environments, it's important to be connected to nature, and specifically for, I think, Black people, where so much of our experience of being connected to the land was being forced to work it, and our ancestors being forced to work it. So at times, I think our connection in a healed way to the land isn't as obvious always. And I really got excited about this idea of this, like, just like this place that this Black man just loves so much. That's like his baby, you know, that like it's his baby because it's limitlessly divine. Like I don't remember if I put this, I think I put this in the book, but like, you know, a seed is kind of like a poor man's prayer, you know, like it could yield so much possibility. And I think for me, like I wanted to show an experience of Black people not, you know, only understanding themselves in an urban environment. And even with our urbanness, we're still so connected to like rhythms and nature in ways that I think, you know, Black people in the United States have been taught or have been forced in coming here and to like disconnect ourselves from all of what truly makes us us. And I think what I, you know, really tried to play with in the book is like how no matter what you do to somebody, no matter how you try to harm them or, you know, sort of deracinate them from their truth, like they're always, you know, like you can tell us, yo, y'all can't drum, y'all can't do your dances, but then all of a sudden we start tap dancing, we start shuffling, we start singing the blues. Like there's ways that we'll always be ourselves, you know? So I think for me, Black Eden was like this, you know, just like this space that I wanted to not only be like a refuge, but a portal within that space for these young Black girls who are also just kind of figuring out their bodies and their spirits, you know, in the ways that their ancestors did, our ancestors did, all of our ancestors did. So.
I love that. And as you were talking, I was reflecting on how this book is critiqued and awarded, and it's a love story, right? But in a sense, to call it a love story is like a super oversimplification because it's like 17 different love stories, right? Like there's so many different kind of overlapping, intersectional kind of love stories that like, you know, between like romance love, between like familial love, between friend love, right? And each character is also like exploring their self-love at the same time. Mm-hmm. And tell me like how do you see these stories as connected to one another? Are they independently like developed, or are they dependent upon one another? Does one relationship enable the other? Is this, maybe this is the question, is this a bunch of different love stories, or is it really one big love story?
Yeah, I think certainly that's a good question. I think when I think of the love in the book and the love stories in the book, I really did want to speak to this way that, you know, young people, especially teens, like just have so much kind of love and romance, whether it's sexual or non-sexual. Like there's a way that like, I think young people can show up for each other. I think for sure me and my friends did, especially because a lot of us were navigating really heavy home lives. So, you know, like there's ways that I learned love from my family. And there's ways that I had to heal love in my family, you know, through who I wanted to become and who I persisted in becoming. And I think like in this book, I also wanted to give space for us to imagine love existing before our generations. I think particularly queer love, and also expanding queerness out of sexuality, you know, and that there's ways that, yeah, you know, like where I think our society is very much like, oh, you can only feel love and connection and romance in this very specific way with this very specific person and nobody else. And I really love writing, for example, the chapters about Queenie, the Audrey's grandmother, who, you know, she's like a wild, you know, free-spirited, you know, 60-something-year-old grandma, but she had her days, you know, and still has her days of like feeling herself, like that part of us that wants to know how our body feels like when it's being pleasured, or wants to know what is in somebody else's spirit or mind. Like this stuff doesn't age out of us. And also that stuff like blossoms really early in us. I think like as a young person, I experienced from my parents, and I think in ways they thought they were very much being protective of me growing up in the, you know, 80s in the hood, when there was a lot of just like stuff was really hot, and stuff is still hot. But I just remember like so much of the ways they protected me was to kind of really police me and sort of like be overprotective in a way that didn't allow me to communicate to them about who I was and what I wanted to know about life. So yeah, and I think they expressed a lot of their fears around like, how do I talk about sexuality with my daughter? I think that was the thing I really wanted to like hold in the book, is like, how do I allow beautiful, tender, sensual, consensual explorations of, romance amongst, girls, amongst young people, in ways that I so long to see and read in books. I think there's just not enough spaces to see the multitude of Black love, or a lot of different kinds of love for that matter, beyond sort of the like heterosexual, white, middle class. We fell in love in our 20s and then everything was perfect from then on because we just knew each other, and it was just, and I think like it also sort of prioritizes romantic love over friendship, over family love. When I feel like some of the biggest heartbreaks I've had has been over the loss of friendships, not even like, romantic partnerships. So I just certainly wanted to give a validation for all kinds of romantic and emotional connections in this book to the best of my ability.
Well, it's interesting. It drives exactly where my next question was, and I want to bring you, Moises and Latrese, back into the conversation. I want to read you a brief passage from the book near the end. It says, "And no matter what, we gotta always be cool and connected to her and each other. Even if you is in Trinidad and I'm in South Africa, Ursa in New York, and Mabel is in heaven or in Black Eden, we will always be fam." Right? And when you were just talking, Junauda, Queenie, you were talking about Queenie, and she reminds me of so many people, right? Like so many people in my life. And as what you were just talking about is this concept of like our chosen, like we have our given family, we have our chosen family, we have those people in our lives. Moises and Latrese, my question for you is, did Queenie remind you of somebody in your life? And if so, or if not, can you talk about just this importance of chosen family, both in the book and in our lives? Latrese, can you take that first?
Sure. Yeah. Queenie, she reminds me of my granny on my mom's side, just because of like, I don't know, like just like her whole vibe. And then she also reminds me of my paternal grandfather, who like he just has like long dreadlocks and he's always outside gardening, like even though he lives on the east side. Like, so that's who Queenie reminds me of. Can you repeat the second part of the question?
It's just this concept of like our given family and our chosen family, like those people who become family through kind of our relationships and the love. And I was just asking about to reflect on the importance of like chosen family too, both in the book, but also in our lives.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, chosen family is really important. I feel like if it wasn't for my chosen family, like I would not be the person that I am right now. Just because like, I mean, I feel like our given family and our chosen family, like they kind of serve different purposes in our lives. Like I know I can go to my chosen family, like my friends, for like more like intimate problems that I might be having, and then like I can go to my, my given family for something that's like, I don't know, like more like support, I guess. So yeah, both are definitely very important, and I feel like it's almost like meant to be with whoever you're given or your chosen family is going, like whoever, you know, is your best friend. Like I feel like that's like my best friends. I feel like they're my soulmates, like, but not in a romantic way. It's just really deep.
Right. Moises, how about you?
Someone in my life that reminds me of Queenie. Queenie is freaking awesome. I was listening to the audiobook version, and just listening to Queenie's voice was like, it made my day every single time that I heard her talk. It was so cool. Someone in my life that's a lot like her would be my big sister Ruth. She's been through a lot. She's grown a lot from a lot of things that she's done in her life, and she's able to provide so much wisdom because of that, and be such a supportive figure for me. So the closest person I got to Queenie is my big sister Ruth. The importance of chosen family. I find chosen family is because even in my given family, there's people that I choose, because there's a lot of people that aren't really there for you or connected to you despite the blood that you share. And you kind of have to choose the people that you're already given to be with you, interconnected, and like solidify your relationship while having this bond of blood. And then the chosen family outside of that is just people that you've grown with, I suppose. In your family, it's kind of like a contractual obligation, kind of, because as a kid, you have nowhere else to go. This is what you got given. That's a perfect way to put it, a given family. And being able to go out and find people that you relate to, find people that you like, find people that you connect to on a personal level, and then develop relationships with them, and then become family with them, is a very strong bond that you can fortify for a lifetime. I find a lot more, not a lot more value in chosen family, but it's a lot more personalized, I'd say. It's the check marks, it's the boxes that you've checked out for the people that you're with, rather than the boxes that you've chosen to have with the people that you're given.
Yeah, I love that. And we're running out of time, but I do have just one last question, and that is this: for Mabel, her source of discovery of self-dignity comes from kind of a surprising place, right? And I think that's maybe one of the most powerful kind of pieces of this story is that she finds her mentor. She finds inspiration of all places on death row. Junauda, I'm curious, like when that came to mind, how that came to mind, and if you think you feel in this era where many of us have woken up in the last year to something that many of us have been saying since far before that we've got to fundamentally do public safety and the way we kind of engage with our criminal justice system differently. Do you feel like people respond to this book differently based on all the events that have happened in America in the last 12 months?
Most certainly. I even responded to this book differently because of it, because I wrote it before George Floyd, and for me, I've known, people personally who've been harmed and killed by Minneapolis police. Obviously it doesn't just happen in Minneapolis, happens all over the Twin Cities. So I think for me, it was kind of like I was grateful to have written a book that was already processing some of these things before it became such huge news, because I think, and also wanted to deal with it on a spiritual kind of like, global, multi-generational level. Like this isn't new, like the ways these things happen, it just isn't new, So for me, I feel like initially when I was writing the book, and I just think this with all art, like art kind of like just takes over my life, like I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is sort of my meditation, are these stories, are these spirits, who are coming to me. And really grateful to have some, something that's geared towards young people, but obviously accessible to all people, to really talk about these issues. Like obviously this is, I think the book on surface is like, oh, a coming of age, young adult romance. But in a lot of ways for me, it was like, just like an opportunity to unpack so much of what's happening. And it's constant. Like you said, it's constant. Like every day we wake up to some new stuff. And like, but what grounds and what holds, is softness, is sweetness, is chosen family, is being willing to be the end of certain dysfunction within your own family, which I think is crucial in these times. It takes a certain kind of bravery and boldness. So for me, like, yeah, I do feel grateful. Even reading the book or listening to people say things, I'm like, wow, I have like the book in some ways was just channeled out, and now I am learning from the book in ways, But yeah, and I learned from so many of the young people who I get the opportunity, you know, like Latrese and Moises and even younger, who really just sort of like bring so much insight about this moment and, you know, use the book as a talking point to jump off of. Because, and I don't know, like, you know, me and you, Mayor, are in the same generation. So I feel like, you know, there's ways that, you know, we had to learn so much and hold so much, and, you know, kind of were healing the past generations of our families who in a lot of ways were like freedom fighters, that, you know, a lot of things got repressed and oppressed in the 80s and 90s with the war on drugs and, you know, all of these other things. So yeah, like right now feels like a very heavy moment, but also super fascinating. And just hearing young kids talk about self-care and therapy as an aspect of their activism, you know, where I feel like we grew up where we're like, man, we gotta struggle, we gotta resist, we gotta, and that like now there's just so much inherent softness and care within, you know, resistance. And that's what our ancestors wanted. They wanted our softness, they wanted our care. They didn't want us to struggle no more. So I don't even know if I answered your question, but yeah.
You did. You did. Thank you so much. Look, Junauda, Moises, Latrese, thank you so much for, well, I was going to say your time, but more than that, your presence. I really appreciate you just allowing yourself to be present in this moment, for sharing in the ways that you do. I know that in the same way as we all related to so many of the characters in this book, that so many of the folks who are watching this are probably relating to you as well. And you are enlivening this book for us, but you're enlivening yourselves, and in doing so, you're helping us to enliven all of ourselves kind of through your experience. Junauda, thank you so much for being bold enough, for being brave enough to launch this story into the earth, into the world. You know, our theme is Read Brave, and without an author like you, we wouldn't have something to read brave. So thank you for that. All of you at home, thank you so much for participating in this today. Thank you for being a part of Read Brave. Thank you for participating in this. If you want to learn more about Read Brave, including upcoming events and opportunities to connect to your community, head to readbrave.org. There's really 4 ways to connect. You can read the books. Like I mentioned, we have a whole cohort of books that our librarians have cultivated for us, so that we can read Brave in an academic setting and in a grad school setting. We can read Brave in preschools and kindergartens. We can read Brave in middle school and high school. We can read Brave whoever you are, wherever you are. There's a book, or maybe 2, or maybe 3 for you. Because I have to admit, I enjoy reading the Read Brave children's books with my children. 2, talk and share. You know, discuss the books with your book clubs, with your friends, with your family. We've seen a whole network of book clubs and folks kind of city employee groups reading the books together, family members reading the books together, and using it as a way to kind of, parents reading the books with their children and using it as a way to craft kind of their own narratives and understandings of one another together. That's important. Join us for book-based events and activities, stuff like this. You can browse our list of events and activities for all ages. You can see the books for all ages at that website at readbrave.org. And the final thing is, share your story. Be bold. Be like Junauda. Be like Moises. Be like Latrese. And share your story, because in doing so, you liberate yourself and you also liberate others. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Can't thank you all enough. And I'll look forward to seeing you soon.